Greetings, everyone. My name is Emmanuel, and I would like to welcome you to our program today. We are continuing with our series on rebuilding a new Africa through decentralization. And our topic today is the role of the church in defending the poor and the needy, the marginalized, the oppressed, the fatherless, all those who are suffering. The Bible says that we as the church, we are to be the voice of the voiceless, the defender of the defenseless. You see, the church has an important role to play in our communities and in our nations. We have to stand up for the oppressed, the marginalized, the widows, the fatherless, the poor, the needy, the vulnerable people. In the Old Testament, in Proverbs chapter 31, the Bible says that we are to plead the case of the oppressed. We are to plead the case of the poor and the needy. You see, the church plays two important roles. One, the spiritual role of the church in our communities and in our nations. And the church also plays a political role in our communities and in our nations. You see, the poor are oppressed, the needy are oppressed, the fatherless, the widows. These people are suffering because of the laws of the politicians. These people are suffering because of the policies that are initiated by the politicians and implemented by the politicians. That is why people in our communities and in our nations are suffering. And here, God is telling the church, God is speaking to believers, to defend the cause of the poor, to stand up for the oppressed, to be the voice of the voiceless, to be the defender of the defenseless, those who cannot help the church, those who cannot help themselves. The church has to step in to fight for them. You see, in Proverbs, like we said, Proverbs 31, I think verse 9, it says, we should speak for those who are dumb. We should plead the cause of the poor and the needy. In Psalms 82, verse 3 and 4, it says that we should defend the fatherless and the poor. It also says we should do justice to the afflicted and to the needy. That is the role of the church. Who are the ones who are oppressing the poor and the needy? Mainly the politicians. So one of the functions of the church is political. The church has to rise up to speak against injustice. In Psalms 82, the Bible says we should do justice to the afflicted. We should judge righteously. That's what Proverbs also says. You see, justice and righteousness. Those are political activities that the church has to get involved in, because a lot of people in Africa are suffering. So the church must be the voice of the voiceless and the defender of the defenseless. You see, even in the New Testament, James talks about the role of the church in our communities and in our nations. And James said, pure religion and undefiled is for Christians to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. To visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. To stand up for them. To speak against all those who are oppressing people in our societies and in our communities. To plead the cause of the poor and the needy. That is the role of the church in the 21st century and beyond. The church has to stand up, to speak against marginalization of minority groups. The church has to stand up to speak against the oppression of the poor and the needy. You see, even Jesus himself rebuked the scribes and the Pharisees in Matthew chapter 23, verse 23. Jesus said, you are paying your tithes, of mint, anise, and cummins, but you are neglecting the weightier matters of the law, which is justice, righteousness, faithfulness, mercy. You are neglecting the weightier matters of the law, which is righteousness, that is judgment, justice, mercy, faithfulness. Jesus had to rebuke the Pharisees and the scribes. These were political leaders of their day. They were focusing only on tithes and offerings, but they were neglecting justice. They were neglecting righteousness. They were neglecting mercy. Jesus had to rebuke them. You see, the role of the church in our communities, in our nations, we, the church, have to stand up for the poor, the needy, the marginalized, the oppressed. Remember the story of Job, Job chapter 29, verse 15 and 16. Job was the eyes to the blind. Job was the feet to the lame. Job was the father to the fatherless. But today, in some of our countries, when our people are suffering, when the government is marginalizing minority groups, when the government is punishing people, churches are not speaking. Churches are silent. Oh, my dear brothers and sisters, don't fall into that category. When the government is oppressing its own citizens, churches have to rise up and condemn the activities of politicians against their own citizens. The churches have to rise up and speak up for the oppressed. The churches have to rise up and speak up for the marginalized. The churches have to rise up and speak up for the widows, for the fatherless, for the afflicted, for the foreigners who are being oppressed by our governments. The role of the church is to be the voice of the voiceless and the defender of the defenseless. The role of the church is to deliver the oppressed, to deliver the fatherless, to deliver the needy, to deliver the afflicted from the hands of the wicked politicians, from the hands of those who are exploiting vulnerable people, those who are oppressing, the poor and the needy and the fatherless. That is what the church should be doing. We should not only focus in tithes and offering, but we must also focus in delivering those who are suffering, fighting for the poor, fighting for those who cannot defend themselves. Just like Job, he was the eyes to the blind, he was feet to the lame, he was father to the fatherless. James tells us we have to visit the widows in their affliction. We have to visit the needy. We have to visit the fatherless. Jesus himself said that I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was in prison and you didn't visit me. There are people who are suffering in our communities and in our nations. As the church, we must stand up for these people. We must speak up. We must defend them. We must speak on their behalf. We must plead their case. That is what the Bible tells us. We must do justice. We must do righteousness. The role of the church is to defend the fatherless. The role of the church is to defend the poor. The role of the church is to defend the afflicted, the marginalized, the oppressed in our communities and in our nations. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please share this video with your friends and family members. We will continue tomorrow. Until tomorrow, bye-bye.